New season, new chaos in college football.
Let's go! Big stage, big opportunity.
This Labor Day weekend, the wildness lives on ABC, ESPN, and the all-new ESPN app.
What a way to start!
Featuring top 10 teams like Clemson, Notre Dame, Alabama, and LSU, and Bill Belichick's debut at North Carolina.
It's so special when these teams collide.
Don't miss a lineup filled with electric matchups.
Welcome back to college football.
Kickoff week presented by Modelo. Labor Day weekend on ESPN and ABC. Also available to stream on the all-new ESPN app.
When I wake up, well, I know I'm gonna be the man who wakes up next to you. When I go out, yeah, I know I'm gonna be the man who goes along with you. If I get drunk.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Sooner Nation podcast. We've been taking a deep dive into everything Oklahoma football over the last couple of weeks, and today we're going to flip sides of the ball, where we have been talking defense. Now we're going to start talking offense. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that this next position group might just define Oklahoma's 2025 season. Obviously, I think we all know where we're heading. It's towards the offensive line. Now, I know what you're thinking. The offensive line, what? That's not the flashiest position group. But make no mistake, this unit they've got to be the backbone for what Brent Venables hopes and what all of Sooner Nation hopes is a turnaround season in Norman. After the disaster that was 2024, all the eyes of Sooner Nation are firmly on these front five guys. Can they stabilize, and can they let this offense breathe again? Now let's rewind for a second. Last season was just abysmal, right? Oklahoma's offensive line was supposed to be the foundation for a balanced, explosive offense, and instead it really became the Achilles heel. Oklahoma entered the 2024 season already replacing 5 starters from the previous team that won 10 games a year before. And that's tough enough on its own, but the injury bug hit, and then it hit hard. Bill Bedenbaugh had to rotate 3 different left tackles, 3 different left guards, 3 different centers, and 3 different right tackles in just the first 9 games of the season. Now think about it for just a second. That's 9 games, 9 different combinations. And the only constant throughout the entire season was at right guard with Febechi Nwaiwu. He managed somehow to stay healthy. He managed somehow to know his assignments. He managed to start all 13 games for the Sooners in 2024. But around him, you could see the lack of continuity. Oklahoma's offense sputtered. The passing attack completely collapsed. And passing, Oklahoma was ranked near the bottom, not just in the conference, but nationally. The run game was inconsistent at best. And when you think back during that brutal stretch of October, you went Texas, South Carolina, Ole Miss. The problems up front was glaring. Oklahoma couldn't protect the quarterback. They couldn't control the line of scrimmage, and the offense just couldn't function. Now, there were flashes. You think about that upset win over Alabama at the end of the season, and that proved what this group could be. In that game, Oklahoma ran for more than 200 yards, and for the first time really all season long, the offensive line dictated the game. But unfortunately for us, for Sooner Nation, that game, that Alabama game, that was the exception, not the rule. So how did Brent Venables and Bill Bedenbaugh respond? They didn't go with a wholesale change like you see in other offensive units. They just retooled. The offseason wasn't about flipping the whole line over again. It was about carefully adding key pieces. Now, the headliners are easy to spot on this line. You got Michael Fasusi, a 4 or 5 star, depending on which service you look at. At tackle, you've got also Ryan Foji, another 4-star guy. And both of those guys turned some heads during the spring. They had a great summer camp. And teammates raved about them. They didn't just compliment them. They talked about their athleticism. They talked about their technique. And most importantly, that their willingness to be coached. And so these guys come in and they join a group that now blends veterans with young, high upside talent. And maybe that's the balance that might give Oklahoma the continuity that it's been chasing since that 2023 season when they won 10 games. Now, we're going to go more in depth later on in the podcast, but just a quick rundown how I believe this lineup's going to look going into the season. Starting at left tackle, you got Jacob Sexton coming back. The dude's got over 400 snaps under his belt. And if he stays healthy, he could be the anchor on that blind side. Fasusi is also right there behind him. He's that 5-star phenom that we just talked about. And let's be honest, when we talk about Fasusi, when you look at what people are saying about him, players, coaches, recruiting experts, I think he's a guy that's going to force his way onto the field sooner rather than later. The left guard spot, you've got Eddie Pierre-Louis, a redshirt freshman who has seemingly sky-high upside. Heath Ozaida is there. He started 8 games last season, and he kind of got better quietly week by week. In the middle, you've got Stanford transfer Jake Maikkula. I'm so bad with names. Maikkula. And he looks to be that guy in the middle. I know what the depth chart says. We'll get into all that. But this is a guy that has 1,100 career snaps. He's got battle-tested reliability, and that's what Oklahoma needs, and I might say desperately needs. Now, the thing here is that also Troy Everett's in that spot. But the good thing about Everett is that he's versatile enough to play multiple spots along that front. And that gives Bill Bedenbaugh more depth, more proven depth. Now, right guard is locked up. Febechi's there. He's the lone warrior who survived 2024. I think he's the heart of this unit. 339-pound bruiser. And he earned offensive lineman, all-conference offensive lineman honors after that win over Alabama. But also keep an eye on Ryan Foji at this spot as well. Now he's not gonna replace Febechi unless an injury situation occurs, but Foji could be the future at this spot. And I think finally, when you look at right tackle, Derek Simmons. He's a transfer who gave up just 4 pressures at Western Carolina, but the problem is that was Western Carolina. Now behind him is another portal addition in Luke Bakalenko. I think he's going to add competitive depth. I really believe that this spot at right tackle belongs to Simmons. But I mean, altogether, for once, it looks like Oklahoma actually has depth along the front 5. They've got health along the front 5. They've got starters, they've got reliable backups, and they've even got future stars who are waiting for their turn. Now, let's be real, let's be honest. None of that matters if this line doesn't show up when it counts. John Mateer, for all of the hype, he's only as good as his protection. Jaden Ott, for all the hype, he can only be effective as the holes that open up in front of him. And this is an offense that ranked 121st nationally in passing yards per game. That's not Oklahoma football. That's definitely not SEC ready football. Now the difference in 2025, it's got to come from the trenches. And you feel like this shift is already happening. You know, back, if you go rewind 5 months ago, back during spring practice, Eddie Pierre-Louis said this: our goal is to be the most explosive offense in the entire country. Every day we're bringing intensity. Now, that's not just talk from a guy on the offense. Listen to what David Stone said from the defensive line's perspective. He's talking about that this line is pushing the defense daily. And they're making everyone better. That's a 5-star defensive lineman saying that. Now, this is year 4 for Brent Venables. We've talked about that on other episodes. We've talked about it on the website. And to be blunt, The pressure's on. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. We don't necessarily like it, but doesn't mean we disagree with it. I believe Oklahoma fans, I believe Sooner Nation has been patient with Venables. I believe that there was more to what he inherited than anybody knows, and I'm talking about problems. But even patience has a shelf life. 2 losing seasons in 3 years, that's not the standard in Norman. If this offensive line holds up, Oklahoma has the quarterback. The Sooners have the running back. And they've got the weapons to make noise in the SEC. But if this line falters again, that noise that you're going to hear, it won't be from the fireworks on the field. It'll be from critics really calling more so into question Brent Venables, his ability to rebuild this program and keep it going. So what should we be looking for starting Saturday evening with this offensive line? I think first of all, you look for health. Can Jacob Sexton stay on the field? Can Fasusi handle the grind as a true freshman? I think the second thing you look for is stability. Will these 5 starters stick? Or are we going to see injuries force another round of musical chairs along the offensive line? Third, run game efficiency. If Oklahoma is able to consistently move the ball on the ground, that's going to be our biggest sign. That's the biggest thing that we can look at for progress. And finally, pass production. That starts with protecting the quarterback. Keep an eye on the sack numbers. Watch the pressure rate. And those stats are going to tell the truth about this group. At the end of the day, Oklahoma's offensive line, it's not just blocking defenders coming this fall. I know it sounds silly and cliche, but they're blocking doubt. They're blocking frustration. They're blocking the memory of a wasted 2024. This group is deeper, they're more healthy, and they're more talented than they were a year ago. If they deliver, Oklahoma can really jump back into being a program that's relevant nationally. But if they don't deliver, look, it's just going to be another long year of SEC football. But either way, Oklahoma's 2025 football season begins and it ends with these guys up front.
This episode is brought to you by Netflix. Becoming the most valuable sports franchise in the world doesn't happen without risk. A man who's willing to bet it all, and the players ready to make their own luck. America's Team, The Gambler and His Cowboys, is the story of the 1990s Dallas Cowboys and Jerry Jones's impact on NFL history. Featuring interviews with iconic 90s players and more. Watch America's Team, The Gambler and His Cowboys, streaming now only on Netflix.
It's Tuesday of game week. That means that the depth chart has been released. It came out on Monday afternoon. And if you were expecting a lineup full of no-brainer starters and safe, predictable choices, then you may have been caught off guard just a little bit. Brent Venables and his staff dropped a depth chart that really kind of looks part roadmap, part question mark, and part motivational tool. Now, the game against Illinois State is Saturday night, and then Michigan's comes in to Norman in week 2. And what this lineup tells us, it's not just about who's starting, but it's also about how this roster is still very much under construction. Let's walk through it just a little bit, position by position. Starting at quarterback, obviously there's no surprise here. John Mateer, the Washington State transfer, he's QB1. That's been the plan since the day he arrived in Norman. Oklahoma didn't bring him in to ride the bench, and let's, be honest, he's looked the part all through fall camp. The Sooners need this guy. They need his experience against what is a very brutal schedule in 2025. But here's the thing. With all the ors that we're about to talk about elsewhere, Mateer is one of the very few unquestioned starters on this roster. And that puts some pressure on him, maybe enormous pressure. Venables and Ben Arbuckle are basically saying, here's the keys, now drive us forward. And look, there's no safety net behind him. Michael Hawkins, I believe, has still a very high upside, but I think he's still very underdeveloped. I'm excited to see what Michael Hawkins can become through Arbuckle's tutelage. I'm not ready for Michael Hawkins to have the keys to this offense just yet. I think John Mateer has to deliver, and if he doesn't, I think we're going to see chaos. Now, you got your first plot twist at the running back position. Most people thought that Jaden Ott, transferring out of Cal to Oklahoma, he was one of the best portal pickups in the entire country. They thought he would instantly lead at this position. But the depth chart says otherwise. You've got Javonte Barnes listed as RB1. True freshman Troy Blaylock is RB2. Now, it is fair to say that Ott has been dealing with a shoulder injury and he's working his way back. He's there at RB3. Now, I don't believe that this is a punishment for Ott. I think it's more about rewarding fall practice, fall camp performances. Barnes had a really, really strong camp. Blaylock has been one of the breakout stories this whole offseason. He's quick, he's decisive, and apparently, he's ready to legitimately contribute to this team. But for Ott, who I believe and you believe and everybody else believes is going to be the feature back within this offense, I think it's just about patience and health. Now, mid-season, if he's not the feature back, we can come back to this and say, okay, what's happening? But for week one, this is Javonte Barnes' backfield, and that's okay. Because what you really want is you want Ott at 100% going into that Michigan game. You don't really need him in game one. I think you definitely need him in game two. Now, here's another shocker. Jaren Kanak. He has spent his entire career at linebacker, but now he is your starting tight end. Yep. I know this is, if you don't know this by now, you haven't been paying attention. But Oklahoma has a senior who's never caught a collegiate pass as tight end number one. I know some people are approaching this with some trepidation. I'm pretty excited about it. Because I remember Kanak's recruitment out of high school. You probably do as well. And the thing is, he was a star on both sides of the ball. And he's got some really, really good offensive tape out there. And I think there's so many different wrinkles. I think there's so many different things that they can do with him offensively that you can't help but be excited. Now, with that said, I don't believe he'll be your starting tight end week two. Because guys like Carson Kent, Will Huggins, they're more frame-wise, body frame. They're more apt to really go toe-to-toe with a defensive end. You don't need that in week one. If Kanak can't block whoever's coming after him in week one, we got problems. Now, week two against Michigan, a very, very, very good defensive front. I wouldn't want Kanak up there. So I think you're going to see Will Huggins and Carson Kent. Both of those are transfers. Now, I think where you see the athleticism of Kanak, and really you see how this staff, particularly Arbuckle, is willing to think outside the box. I think you also have to think that this position it's unsettled. And the injury problem, I get it. There's been an injury, but not with Huggins, not with Kent. I think it's more of inexperience and honestly a lack of proven options. And Oklahoma's taking a gamble here. But I think it's a good gamble. I'm excited. Because if Kanak can even be serviceable at this position, it's a risk that's going to pay off. But it's a bold move. It's a bold move, especially if it holds up going into conference play. Because in conference play, mistakes get punished pretty quickly. Now, we started this podcast by talking about the offensive line. We're going to end the podcast by talking about the offensive line. So we might as well throw a little blurb here in the middle about them. Because there's so many ors. I mean, look, you look at this depth chart up front, and it's or, and more ors. Now, we talked about Febechi Nwaiwu locked in at right guard. But every other position is co-starters. Left tackle, center, right tackle. Michael Fasusi is technically at the top of the depth chart at left tackle. But he's or with Jacob Sexton. Luke Bakliko is in there. It's an open battle across the board, and I think as a fan base we kind of get tired of the ors. We just want to know. But isn't this classic Bill Bedenbaugh, right? I mean, he pushes competition with his 5 as long as possible. And you think with the injuries and the inconsistency that we saw from this group last year, maybe that's the smart move. But it also, you look at that other side, maybe it's also a really risky move. Because we already mentioned it. I mean, week 2, it's Michigan. And I don't know that this is obviously going to be the Michigan that won the national championship 2 years ago. But this defensive front, by all accounts, this defensive front for the Wolverines may be one of the nastiest defensive fronts that Oklahoma faces all season long. So you look at these ors, and maybe they're good for competition, but I don't know about you. I'm kind of hoping that this time next week that we see more certainty with that starting 5 up in the trench. Now, you get to wide receiver and things start to feel a little bit more clear. Right? You got Keontae Lewis at X, Isaiah Sategna at H, Dion Burks at Z. And those are your top 3 receivers. And finally, when you get, what I liked about the receiver position is you get to a spot in the depth chart where there's no chaos. And you've got a trio here that brings size, they bring speed, they bring reliability. And John Mateer has legitimate targets, and I think they're targets that he can trust. And I know the depth behind these 3 is still sorting itself out. But Oklahoma has a top unit set, and that's got to be a relief for the fan base. Now, when you flip to the defensive side, I think you actually see a nice mix of stability and rotation here. Obviously, R. Mason Thomas is locked in at defensive end. Peyton Bowen is locked in at safety, and those are your anchors of the defense. At defensive tackle, though, you're seeing a full-on rotation. Jaden Jackson, Grayson Halton, David Stone, Dominique Williams. But that's 4 guys, all 4 expected to contribute. And I don't believe it's indecision. I think it's depth. And I think it's an advantage for Oklahoma. Like in the SEC, Oklahoma can afford to rotate big bodies up front and not have a drop-off. I think that's an advantage the Sooners have that's going to pay off in late games. Now, opposite of R. Mason Thomas, you've got Marvin Jones Jr. He's penciled in, but Taylor Wayne is pushing him hard. And again, I think it's more about the abundance of talent than it is about doubt and ability. But the linebackers, I was a little bit shocked. I think it's a little bit tricky when you get into the linebacker position because, life after Danny Stutzman was never going to be easy. You had Kip Lewis, Kobe McKenzie, and Sammy Amashigo. And those are the names that you're going to see. But then every single spot has an or. I didn't expect that. I didn't expect Kip Lewis to be or. Now, I think the staff clearly trusts Kip Lewis to be a leader here on this defense. But the depth, it's not great at linebacker. Transfers hurt this room in the offseason. But they're also bringing in some flexibility with Kendall Daniels at Cheetah, and that helps. However, I mean, the truth is with this position, we talked about it just yesterday, this position is one injury away from being a major problem. So you look at what you think, what you hope is another very solid unit on this defense, and that's the secondary. Now, there's a lot of talent. There are a lot of talent on this secondary. But if you study the depth chart, which I think maybe we probably spend too much time. I've probably spent too much time talking about it, and we definitely probably spend too much time studying it. But there's a lot of questions if you take a deep look at this depth chart. Now, Eli Bowen, he's last year's breakout freshman. He's nowhere to be found. But the reason why, I mean, we don't want to make a big deal out of this, he missed all of fall camp. I loved seeing Gentry Williams now that he's finally healthy. I love seeing him hold down one corner spot. But the other corner, you're either going to have a true freshman in Cortland Gilroy, or you're going to have Jacoby Johnson. Now is that a massive vote of confidence for Gilroy, or is it Johnson still hasn't, in his second year, still not there? I think it's a reminder to us how fragile this position group can be with an injury. Because if Bowen's healthy, then it's not a question. Now, there is a Bowen at safety, Peyton, and he's set. But I was surprised, you probably were as well, that Robert Spears Jennings is listed with an or next to Michael Boganowski. Now, again, when I look at this, to me, I think it's less about Spears Jennings losing ground and really more about Boganowski and how quickly he's rising up. And honestly, I think we should be encouraged by that, because depth at this position is turning into a strength. And I mean, look, we know Boganowski. This guy, you remember him, you see him. The guy's physically got all the tools. What you want him to do is catch up mentally. And by all accounts, he's very much on his way there. I guess we got to talk special teams, quiet stability here. You got UTSA transfer, Tate Sandell. He's going to be your kicker. Kennesaw State transfer, Jacob Ulrich is your punter. Satina is going to handle both kick and punt returns. Nothing really flashy there, but I do like the reliability of that position. So what's the big picture here? What do we or what should we make from this depth chart? Well, I think when you look at just the sheer number of oars, it may look a little bit chaotic. But I also think going into year number 4, clearly this is Brent Venables' style. The dude loves competition. He wants players fighting for snaps well into the season. There's a risk, though, and we've seen it, especially on the offensive line and linebacker, where you really may not have the luxury of figuring it out during the season. I mean, I don't want to keep going back to Michigan, but I almost have to, because that game, the Wolverines, they're going to demand answers immediately. So the opener Saturday against Illinois State, it won't tell us a lot at all. But in week 2, I think we're going to find out if these oars represent depth and flexibility, or if they represent indecision and instability. I think for now, we should see this depth chart as a snapshot of probably a team that's still shaping its identity. There's talent there. There's no question. There is talent there. The question is whether Brent Venables can mold it into consistency, execution, and try to make a championship run out of it. And I think that's the story of the depth chart as we head into Saturday.
With a major selection of the looks your kiddos love starting at just $4 in the Walmart app, a new school year means a stylish new them. Who knew? Find skater skirts and Crocs that say, I'm casual but cool. Sparkly sneakers that say, it's my classroom, you're just learning in it. And preppy polos that say, I'm the teacher's pet, even if they're mommy's menace at home. Find their favorite styles starting at just $4 in the app. The Walmart you thought you knew is now new.
What does every USAA member have in common? Family. We're one big family who supports the military community and their eligible families. And if you, your parent, or spouse served, you could join our family and save big on auto insurance. Visit USAA.com/join today to check your eligibility. Membership eligibility and product restrictions apply and are subject to change. USAA means United Services Automobile Association and its affiliates, San Antonio, Texas.
Well, let's wrap this up by going back to where we started and taking a really deep dive into Oklahoma's trenches. We're talking Oklahoma football here on the Sooner Nation podcast, specifically the offensive line. Do me a quick favor, though. Before we go into this, would you hit that subscribe button to whatever platform? I know we're on Spotify, we're on Apple Podcasts, we're on YouTube. We're, wherever you're finding us, would you give us a subscription? That really means a lot, and it helps. It really does, as we're trying to get this thing back up and running. Now, back to football, for all the storylines about John Mateer and Jaden Ott, there's a simple truth here. None of it matters if this offensive line can't hold up. And I mean, look, it's not hating to say that this line was the Achilles heel of the football program in 2024. That's just truth. Oklahoma's offensive line was one of the worst in the country. Look, in total yards per game, 203rd. Averaging, I think there's 331 yards a game. And that's so far below the standard of Oklahoma football. And there were plenty of reasons. The root cause was injuries, but you had instability along the offensive line. You had inexperience. And we talked about this in the opening segment. This was a team that was already replacing all 5 starters from 2023. So there was zero margin for error, and then boom, injuries hit, and they decimated it. Jacob Sexton went down. Jake Taylor barely saw the field. Troy Everett, the center, he missed the first 5 games with a knee issue. And by mid-season, Bill Bedenbaugh was rolling out combinations that were more patchwork, more than they were anything with production and protection. And so the results were predictable. Against teams like Texas, South Carolina, Ole Miss, the pass protection broke down. But then, and this is the weird part, we saw flashes of dominance against Alabama, for example. Oklahoma ran for over 200 yards in that 24-3 win. They completely manhandled what was believed to be one of the best defensive fronts in the entire country. And now what gives us hope moving into 2025 is that game showed that there wasn't a lack of talent. The problem with Oklahoma's offensive line was more about health, chemistry, and consistency. So that sets the stage for this fall. And this offensive line, it looks a lot different. And we've talked about the depth chart, and it's a puzzle, like you're trying to put things together. Your guess is as good as mine. But here's my best guess as to who we're going to see take the field when the offense has its first series on Saturday. I think at left tackle, you're going to start with Jacob Sexton. That's a name that Oklahoma fans know well. He's a 4-star in the 2022 class. He's played more than 400 snaps at both left tackle and left guard. He's versatile, he's physical, and the story here is his health. He hasn't yet had a season where injuries didn't derail him. And I feel like we say this across the board with a lot of guys. We just talked about Ginger Williams a couple days ago. If Sexton can stay healthy, he could anchor the left side of this line and give Oklahoma the stability that it really, really needs. Now behind him, is probably the crown jewel of the future in terms of Oklahoma's offensive line. That's Michael Fasusi. 5-star recruit, one of the top tackles in the entire 2025 class. And he's got the tools to be elite. I just don't know that he's got the experience, and that's why I'm pushing Sexton up there as my starter. But the staff, they've raved about his work ethic. They've raved about his athleticism. And maybe he's not going to start week 1, but don't be surprised. Don't be surprised if at some point he works his way on the field, because I think he's just that good. I think next to Sexton, you've got sophomore Eddie Pierre-Louis. Last year, the staff redshirted him after just 4 appearances. But this season, he's expected to have that breakout. He's a guy, he's explosive, he's strong. The teammates say that he's been one of the leaders in terms of intensity during the offseason. And his goal, in his own words, is for Oklahoma to be the most explosive offense in the country. Now, that's big talk. But if this guy delivers, he could be a tone setter for that. I think Ozada brings as a backup to him. There's experience there. He started 8 games last year. And again, because of injuries, he was out there. But he did log over 600 snaps. But he himself missed spring while recovering from surgery. And I think he'll push Pierre-Louis, but I think that's his spot. I believe at center, things are going to get really interesting. They went into the portal. They got Stanford transfer, Jake Maikkula. He's the most experienced guy. Hands down, the most experienced guy. He's got over 1,100 career snaps. He started 10 games last year for Stanford, and he does have the flexibility to play guard as well, but I think the plan is going to be for him to settle in at center. Now, here's why this is tricky, because the incumbent here is Troy Everett. And I think he's still very much in the picture. He started in 2023. He started in 2024. But again, injuries limited him last year. If he's healthy, he brings leadership. This is a guy who won the Bob Calsall Award for leadership, for being a role model. But also, he is versatile. Then that gives Bill Bedenbaugh options to move him somewhere else. But the fact that Bedenbaugh went into the portal to get Maikkula, it tells you that they weren't 100% confident with Everett being the long-term solution at this season. That's why I think Maikkula is going to be your starter. Moving to the right side, I think, it's clear at guard is Febechi Nwaiwu. He's the only Sooner, we talked about this earlier, he's the only guy on the offensive line to start all 13 games in 2024. And, his season was up and down, all right, but we saw him make improvements, and particularly later into the season. Won the SEC Offensive Lineman of the Week against Alabama. Now, statistically, he allowed 16 pressures and 4 sacks last year. But you saw his pass blocking grade jump up as the season went on. Now he's got another year in Bedenbaugh's system, another year of coaching, and he's the guy that I think not only should he, I think Oklahoma needs him to take a big leap in 2025. And then obviously behind him, you've got Ryan Foji, another freshman who turned heads at camp. But like Fasusi, I just don't know that he's quite ready. I don't know that he's the guy with all that's on the line for Oklahoma this year. I don't think those are the guys you want to trust in this moment. So I got Foji as the backup. So the final spot here, right tackle, I think it's a little bit of a wild card. I like Derek Simmons, another Porter guy from Western Carolina. He's a veteran, over 1,500 career snaps. And look, I get it. He was playing at the FCS level. I understand. But he did prove himself against bigger competition. He played against Arkansas. He played against North Carolina State. And in those games, he only allowed 4 pressures combined. I think that's a pretty big-time performance considering the level he was on and the level that he was playing against. I think he's going to compete with another Stanford transfer, Luke Baklenko. And he also has starting experience. But here's where things I think it's going to be Simmons, but I wouldn't rule out Jacob Sexton or Jake Taylor if he gets healthy, having this spot on the right tackle. I think if there's an unsettled big question mark position on the starting five, I think it's right here at this position. But the big picture is this. What we've got is a group that returns 4 of 5 starters who finished the season together last year. Plus, you've got depth from young guys that are talented, and you've got key portal additions. So unlike 2024, when Bedenbaugh was kind of juggling 3 different lineups every week, I feel like this year looks more stable. You got the 2 freshmen, Fasusi and Febechi. What these guys are doing is they're fueling competition. You've got the veterans, and they're bringing leadership. I think the intensity from what you hear from practice, from players, from coaches, the intensity has gone up across the board. I mean, that's why David Stone had that comment, that they're fighting to make this team even better. Guys, that's a good sign. But let's be clear about this. The standard, it's not just about improvement. The standard at Oklahoma is dominance. Oklahoma doesn't want to be the 100th best offense. They don't even want to be the 50th best offense. They want to be explosive, and that starts with these guys up front. So if Sexton stays healthy, if Pierre-Louis delivers on his promise, if the middle of this line solidifies, if Simmons can make the jump from Western Carolina to the SEC, then I think you see a group that goes from liability to strength, and maybe just this one season. But that's what it's going to take. Because I want to come back around to this one more time. In week 2, Michigan's coming to town. And that defensive line, they don't care about excuses. They don't care about youth. They don't even care about the progress you're making. That's a group that's going to test Oklahoma up front right away. So for all the talk we've had about Mateer or Ott or the receivers, remember this. Oklahoma's 2025 season will be defined in the trenches. If this offensive line rises to the challenge, if the Sooners can compete in this conference, but if this line doesn't rise to the challenge, it's going to be a frustrating year. Either way, we're going to find out soon. That's going to wrap it up for us for today on the Sooner Nation podcast. Again, thanks so much for tuning in. Thanks for subscribing. You can find us online, heartland-sports.com. We'd love to see you over there as well. Have a great Tuesday.